Hello, everyone, and welcome again to Unabridged Bookstore in this virtual space. If you have not been a part of any of our virtual events before, we'll give just a few minutes to make sure that everybody is in and able to see our guests for the evening before we get started. Actually, it looks like everybody's in now, so we can go ahead and go. Welcome. Thank you all for coming tonight. We are thrilled tonight to have with us Zach Salih, author of Let's Get Back to the Party, which was recently released and has quickly become a favorite here at Unabridged. So we're just thrilled to hear from him tonight. Just a few things before we get started. If you have any questions for the authors throughout the evening, feel free to pop those into the Zoom chat function here, and we'll be monitoring those after we've had a chance to hear from Zach and Rebecca. We'll get to some of those questions in just a little while. If you're experiencing any tech difficulties or have any other questions about this event or anything else at Unabridged, feel free to hit reply to the email invite that you got, and I'll be happy to help you. So without further ado, tonight we are joined by Zach Salih, who lives in Washington, D.C. Before this, Zach's writing has appeared in Crazy Horse, the Chattahoochee Review, Millions, The Rumpus, and all over the place. And Let's Get Back to the Party is his first novel. So we are thrilled to be celebrating this debut here at Unabridged. Tonight he is joined in conversation by Rebecca Makkai, who may not need any introduction here. Rebecca is the author of the novels The 100-Year House, The Borrower, and most recently, The Great Believers, which was finalist for the Pulitzer Prize and the National Book Award, as well as several other honors, and being a favorite here at Unabridged. So we are thrilled to have you here tonight to join us in this conversation. So without any further ado, take it away, Zach and Rebecca.
Yay, thanks. And everyone, thank you for coming out or not coming out, staying home, staying right where you are on Thursday night. I am so excited to talk to Zach about this beautiful book, which I received an ARC of, an advanced copy of several months ago, and was dying to get to, but my life keeps being in this, I have to triage my reading according to like, what am I reviewing, or who am I in conversation with, or things I'm judging or whatever. And so when it came up that they were asking me to do this, I was so excited because it was, among other things, an excuse to read this book. So I'm thrilled. So
thanks, Rebecca. Thank you. Thanks so much. And thanks, Matt. And thanks for everyone at Unabridged Bookstore for having me. I'm sure I speak for Rebecca and everyone on here when I say, man, like independent bookstores have just been a lifeline and kind of a Xanax and a Prozac all in one for me for this past year. So it's a real great pleasure to speak at this bookstore and to speak with you and just to just kind of participate in this community. So thanks.
I'm thrilled to, yeah. So have you ever been to Unabridged in person, in real life?
No, but I will say the last American city I went to before lockdown was Chicago.
Yeah.
And so I think of it fondly. I was there because my partner was there for a design conference. And so I met him for the weekend. And as you can expect from having read my book, I spent pretty much the whole time in the Art Institute. Yeah, no, I love Chicago, and we flirt with the idea of moving, and so Chicago is definitely on our list. So I might have to DM you later after this and
seriously, I'll talk you into it. We it's colder than DC, but we have snowplows.
Okay, see, yeah, and you're not kind of, yeah. Well, I don't know. Are there militia people there too?
No.
I mean, well, this is a new thing for us here too. This is a recent thing, kind of looking out your window and seeing, there are militiamen at the coffee shop. But yeah, no, it's a lovely city. It's a lovely city.
It is, and Unabridged is like a core place in my heart in the city. We need to get you in there too. So
awesome.
Well, I want to start by asking you just actually, here's that. Before I ask you this, for people who have not yet experienced the book, I'm going to resist the urge to tell everyone what I think the book is about, I would love to hear, how have you been describing the book to people when they ask what it is?
Oh man, well this is why I depend on readers, as they help tell me what I actually did, because I have no
Yeah.
idea. No, yeah, so really the way I've kind of been describing the book, and this is really something that's only kind of happened in conversation lately, is it's not a coming out story. It's really a coming into, right? In the sense that the main characters, so there are these two men, these two gay men in their mid-30s. They're estranged childhood friends. They meet at a wedding, and they each kind of go on these very kind of tangential journeys that kind of mirror each other. And it's really about each of them trying to find their place in the larger gay and queer community, right? So you have the coming out experience, right? And we have so many wonderful narratives about that. But then it's like, you know, you come out and then, well, what happens after that, right? You're coming into a community, but you're not just coming into a community on your own. You're coming into a community with a very real and very kind of palpable past and history, right? And also a future as well. And so these characters, like me, I kind of belong to this kind of in between generation of gay men who are really suspended between a generation that you know bore the brunt of the AIDS plague. I mean, you know, to me that's it's history. It's not lived experience. Um, and then also weren't around to kind of take advantage of the increased visibility, I think, that we're thankfully seeing in you know, in popular culture, in schools and things like that I certainly was too born too early to really take advantage of. So there are a lot of kind of conflicting emotions involved in that. And so writing about these two characters who are kind of living on these extremes, I thought was a very interesting way to explore that.
And one of the things, you know, you know, as I started reading, I'm always, because I've, you know, I think for every writer, our overactive imagination, especially with our own work,
Yeah,
often
yeah,
leads us to imagine like the worst possible places our writing could go. Like, oh, this would be a cliche if I did this. And I
yeah,
trusted that I was in good hands, but I was like, oh, the danger here would definitely be to make each of these characters kind of a stock type. And you avoided that so deftly, partly by making both Oscar and Sebastian, these two characters, really contain a lot of contradictions within themselves.
yeah. Well, thanks, Rebecca. I'm glad you noticed that. I mean, for me, I was really interested in, well, I find messy characters very interesting. They're the kind
Mhm.
of characters I like to read about, the kind
Yeah.
of characters I like to write. I mean, I don't prefer to be around them in my real social life, but in fiction, I definitely am just captivated by characters who live on these emotional extremes. Um, and so I really wanted both Oscar and Sebastian to be very kind of loud, and I would argue by definition, by being loud, being very queer with their anger and their sadness, and kind of just really bringing it to the forefront of some of the very kind of awkward and sometimes terrible decisions that they make. I was not, you know, it when I first set out to write this book, I mean, I kind of had to pause, because you write about a marginalized community, right? And you take on a very overwhelming sense of responsibility, right? Um, and but kind of perversely, the freedom I felt when I just said, you know what, I'm not going to write, you know, I'm not going to write spit shine characters, you know, and stand them up in a public square. I'm going to assume that the reader, like anyone with half a brain, is already on board with the inherent dignity and self-worth of gay men and queer people. So I'm not going to waste my time trying to convince them of something that's just so obvious. And you know, when you approach it like that, you give people, you give your characters, I think, the freedom to be so much more messier and hypocritical,
Mhm.
and awkward and perhaps very unlikable, which I think just makes them more interesting.
Yeah. One of the interesting things that they're both doing is reaching outside of their own generation, right? They're the
Yeah,
same age. And then we have Oscar, you know, and this is, I think, maybe my favorite part of the book, although I have a lot of favorites. He encounters this older writer who's sort of a Edmund White, Armistead Maupin, Alan Hollinghurst, amalgam.
A lot of people have been pressing me to give them the identity of this author, and I swear I'm not being coy when I say
No.
they are not modeled after anyone in particular for several reasons. One, I don't think I know any of these writers well enough to write a kind of mask character. And as much as I like Sean, I don't think he's as good of a writer as all the people that you mentioned. I think a lot of his kind of cultural cash writing in the 70s and in the well, especially in the 70s, was as a kind of gay ethnographer, right? And so the reason that Oscar is drawn to him has absolutely nothing to do with the style of his writing or his sentences. It's really just about this kind of rebellious abandon of people fucking and people, being hated, because I think to him there's more value in being hated than in being ignored.
Yeah. And he has this very public life that almost is the performance, that is the art in some ways, right? So we have Oscar reaching up to him or back to him, right? To this kind of vibe that he feels is lost as he's looking at, gay friends marrying, adopting babies, all that stuff. And he's reaching back to the past.
Yeah.
And then we have Sebastian, drawn in many ways to this student Arthur, who's younger generation, very comfortable in his own skin.
Yeah.
What was fascinating to me was those wires got crossed, where actually Sebastian ends up reading Sean's work and Oscar ends up connecting with Arthur, this young student.
Yeah.
As you think about generation, to what extent, do you identify more with one or the other, or is these kind of, I know obviously they both come out of your brain, and I think the fact that they coexist in the same book is the point. I'm wondering where you started, in your thinking about generation, and if that changed at all in the writing of the book, as you're doing here what every good book should do, which is asking questions rather than posing answers.
Yes.
But I wonder if those questions even changed for you as you wrote.
Yeah, no, I started with Sebastian. I think anyone who knows me knows that I'm more like him. And I also, he's someone who spends so much time living in his head. I also think in a very strange way, he also really kind of, to me, represents or is an extension of the artist mentality, right? Like, you're spending so much time stuck in your own head. It's a very kind of self-involved and kind of self-absorbed way of thinking about the world and kind of seeing the world. So I started with him. The character of Oscar, who is relatively unlike me, was very much a kind of experiment in a way of being that I could have had. So I just have the great good fortune of not having the awkward coming out experience that he had, right? So basically he comes out in college and his father says, I'll pay for the rest of your college, and then I don't ever want to see you again. I've been so very just dumbly fortunate to just have been so accepted and to have a relatively smooth coming out process, at least in terms of coming out to other people, that I sometimes think about, well, how would I have turned out if I had been more like Oscar? And I think, and so writing in his very kind of acerbic and angry and very kind of outraged voice and attitude was really just a way of thinking that, yeah, I would probably, if I had been disowned by my family, I would probably harden my heart to everyone as well, including people who just wanted to connect with me and who meant me no harm. So
yeah, the ways that these two characters come in and out of each other's lives, I think, is, first of all, it's beautifully done and it's fascinating. It's also a lot of the tension of the book, sort of the main thread we're following. We're not reading to find out will they live happy lives for the rest of their life? We're sort of reading to see their intersections, right?
Yeah, yeah. For me in crafting that book, I'm really glad you noticed that, because I thought that just the occasions in which they interact, but also kind of the ways that their journeys kind of mirror one another in ways that I had both planned and then in ways that were also kind of serendipitous in the writing of it. To me, there was enough of a story there, right? Right.
Mm.
To me, that was the plot, not just them connecting, but also them kind of reflecting one another. And so, they spend so much of the early parts of this novel kind of interacting with and pursuing, for lack of a better term, their kind of intergenerational foils, when really what they're looking for and what they're searching for is one another. So
Yeah.
I felt that kind of sustained, well, that tension, as you put it. I mean, that was enough to keep it going. And then also, I think, to reflect the kind of larger tension on behalf of the reader, just by dint of where the story is set, right, between 2015 and the summer of 2016 with the Pulse nightclub shooting. And so to me, there was an added level of the kind of tension and terror of history, right? And the luxury that we have of knowing where this is leading to, but these characters don't.
Yeah. And you also have, that container of DC, and it's, you get a sense. I mean, DC is a big city, but you have a sense, especially on this. I love the app that you've made up. I think you've made up, called Cruise. That's
I did.
sort of a binder. Yeah.
I think so.
What's that?
I think so. I haven't gotten any cease and desist letters.
It's called that, but yeah. But we get a sense really quickly that this is sort of a hothouse of a city, in terms of, although every 4 years it turns over, or every 2 years, the neighborhood, the community, like, they're going to run into each other. They're going to end up knowing a lot of the same people. So that's a kind of bubble too, a kind of tension that it's almost like they hit the walls of that bubble and bounce back into each other once in a while.
Yeah. And it's also not to brown nose Rebecca, but it's kind of like what you did with the gay community in Chicago, right? Is we tend to think of these stories about gay men as either being contained in San Francisco or New York City. And don't get me wrong, they're both wonderful cities. And the stories set there are very wonderful, but kind of like what you did with Chicago. I mean, DC is it's such an incredibly gay city. And it also boggles my mind how many of these, if only these social conservatives knew how many gay and queer people are working in government, right? Are in government as interns, as press secretaries. I mean, we're everywhere. We're taking over the world.
Yeah. One of my, once in a while, hopefully you're good on this as a debut, I think, but like, you just end up running into online reviews of your own book, which, early on might be tempting to look at, later, hopefully you ignore. But I still, with this last book, you still see once in a while an online review. And there was one, it was like a 1 or 2 star review of my book on Goodreads that was like, I just don't really think there are that many gay people in Chicago.
Oh.
That was I was like, then I can't help you. I really don't know what to say.
Was it signed by someone who lives in like Nome, Alaska?
It's like, I hope it was not like just someone from like the suburbs of Chicago. Or, but maybe it was, this is the thing, it was either from someone from New York being like, what? We're all here.
But see, this Rebecca is where you just say it's fiction. Like, there's a reason it says a novel at the bottom of the Great Religions.
Just made up this whole neighborhood of Chicago. But one thing I actually want to talk to you about that has a lot to do, I think, with community, and also actually a parallel between our books, is both of our books start with party scenes. And I had very specific reasons for doing that. And I want to hear your reasons, because they might be similar. It's so hard to start. It's hard to write a party scene at all.
Especially
it's very
now.
hard. What's that?
It was especially now. It just reading, like,
oh God,
reading your scene and even reading my scene to other people, it just seems very strange. Like I just had I swear to God, I had a very strange thought the other day, thinking, why did I not write masks? Like, why are these people not wearing masks? What kind of
Yeah.
writer am I?
Yeah. Yeah.
Anyway, I'm sorry, continue.
No, I'm with you. I keep, I'll start to have a normal dream. Like people are walking around without masks, and halfway through my dream, I'll be like, masks. And then suddenly I have to account for that, right? But
It's Texas in my dreams. No one wears masks.
I love it. So, it's hard enough to write a party scene. What I discovered is it's very hard to open with a party scene. We have so many people and we don't know any of them yet. So I'm really curious. I mean, maybe you had an easy time with it. It certainly reads very smoothly. I wasn't confused. But I'm curious, we don't start books in arbitrary places. We often try out a few openings, we choose very carefully. You're starting with specifically a wedding.
Yeah.
What was the thinking on starting with that kind of crowd scene and then singling out these individual characters, and how did it come together for you?
Oh, that's a good question. So it really kind of, I don't know what kind of writer you are, but I am very kind of structural in that. So for me, I mean, I knew that this story was beginning right on the heels of the Supreme Court marriage ruling, and that it was going to culminate in some way, shape, or form. I had not figured it out yet with the Pulse nightclub shooting, because to me that year, and it was really a kind of shocking revelation when I realized that both of those events are almost exactly a year apart from one another. This moment of very kind of public celebration, and then this moment of very public trauma. So I knew that it was going to begin there. And one of the kind of key images that I had in my mind from the beginning was just thinking, because I knew I wanted to write about two gay men who just had very, very different and very conflicting ideas about what it meant to be gay in a particular time and place. And so I just had this image of two men who were at a wedding and who were both miserable, but for very different reasons. And why were they miserable? Okay, well, one is miserable because he just got out of a relationship, and how many of us have been single and gone to a wedding and just felt like complete crap. And then on the other hand, I thought there'd be this character who really just thought the whole event was just theater and costume drama and a sham. And I remember just in my own experience hearing and talking to people who were just so antagonistic toward gay marriage, and I couldn't figure it out. And so I think, again, like, Oscar was a way for me to think, well, okay, well, what is the legitimate argument? I mean, there's a legitimate argument to be had about kind of cultural authenticity and queerness and what that means and how that's performed and lived. And so that was the reason that he was particularly unhappy. And so I just thought, okay, well, two people unhappy at a wedding, and then kind of go from there. In terms of like the mechanics of writing that, I mean, I'm a debut writer, so I kind of just went by the seat of my pants. Sure. I mean, I knew that the perspective, that these were going to be two first person perspective narratives. So I suspect that makes it relatively easier for the reader to come in. They know who they're with. They know how they're seeing this world. And hopefully by the end of the first chapter, they realize that the two most important people in this novel are of course Sebastian and then his estranged friend Oscar.
Yeah. Well, it's, if nothing else, I mean, certainly we're in Sebastian's point of view, but there's this spotlight on Oscar in that scene. It's sort of the the reappearance of the lost friend that we know this is going to be. Would you be willing to read us a little bit before we ask some more questions?
I absolutely would. I just so happen to have a book right here. So I think I will just read a few pages. I was gonna read something else, but I think since we're talking about the opening scene, I'll just go ahead and read the first few pages from that. So this is in Sebastian's voice. He arrived at the wedding dressed for a funeral. Sharp black suit, shiny black shirt, skinny black tie, polished black boots, black hair cresting over black sunglasses in a hokusai wave. I turned away from the grooms and watched him tiptoe to an empty back pew on the opposite side of the aisle. Oscar Burnham. I hadn't seen him in 10 years, but underneath that violent head of hair, bowl cut when we'd first met as children, shorn in rebellion when we'd last met as undergraduates, was the same slim boy, slipping inside the ceremony like a snake. Would he remember me? Probably not. After the service, I stepped out of the church into the haze of another high Washington summer. I searched the crowd for Oscar, but couldn't find him, as if he just floated in and out of the wedding briefly like an errant leaf or a ghost. At the foot of the church steps, under a full tree draped in white ribbon, someone laughed. I heard a photographer attack the wedding party back inside. Loving it, the photographer said. Give me more. Cocktail hour. I lingered outside with a beer. Guests milled around the back lawn and garden of the Georgetown estate. Bar tables swaddled in white cloth and crowned with swollen floral arrangements dotted the clipped grass. Beyond that, in a brilliant patch of sunlight, the grooms posed for more photographs, smiling, hugging, kissing, whispering, chucking their chins, nuzzling their noses. I'd been watching them for the past several minutes, forcing my face into a look of fondness so the other guests wouldn't realize I knew absolutely no one here. Danny, my date for the evening, had abandoned me for the restroom and a fresh glass of wine. There was nothing for me to do but stand there and sip, smiling at the people who passed by, at the couple out on the lawn, trying, unsuccessfully, not to dwell on my own recent uncoupling. There, Oscar's long black shape slicing through the space between wedding guests. It paused at the opposite end of the massive stone porch, leaned against a wrought iron balustrade, watched the grooms. No, he was no phantom. He was here, occupying physical space. To look at him, you'd think Oscar was in danger of being blown off the porch by the slightest breeze. He was so slender. He reminded me of something by Egon Schiele, tall, lanky, otherworldly. With his eyes hidden behind those sunglasses, Oscar's gaze was mysterious, unreadable. He was all body, no expression. Across the lawn, the photographer signed a countdown from 5. The wedding party, now regrouped, held hands and leapt in the air. The photographer, checking her camera, said, "That's great. Let's try it again." A groomsman said, "Christ, I need a drink." Fragile grandparents, beer-bellied college buddies, nieces and nephews dolled up in flower dresses and loafers. Someone passed by me and whispered to his companion how great it was to finally be part of a gay wedding. The woman, I assume his wife, said, "It's about time those 2 wild dogs settled down." I'll stop there.
Nice. Fantastic. Random question. Have you listened to your own book on audio at all?
I've listened to excerpts, and I know that we share Michael Crouch, who voices Sebastian.
Yeah.
Both of the so there are 2 different voice artists for each narrative voice, and they're both so fantastic. I want to just pay them to recite my thoughts to me.
Seriously, yeah.
Yeah.
And it's I think that Michael Crouch who did all of the Great Believers. He's your Sebastian, and he has this kind of very gentle, introspective voice that works so well. And then you have, the voice for Oscar is, it's rougher. It's a really, they did it well. They cast it really well.
Yeah, they did a great job. Yeah.
So in a minute, I want to see, we have a while, in like 10 minutes, 15 minutes, we're going to want questions from all of you. I just wanted to give you a heads up. I know Matt just typed that in the chat box too, but if you want to type questions as you think of them.
Yeah, please do. I mean, I'd be a hypocrite if I said, like, I never ask questions at these things. But we're both harmless and very friendly. And
yes.
So ask away.
Yeah, so type them now and we'll get to them in a few minutes. But I want to talk to you a little bit about your path to this book, like in terms of your career.
Yeah, sure.
So I think I'm seeing this right, that you have a master's degree, an MA so this is the same as me. I don't have an MFA in creative writing. I had an MA, was publishing a lot of short stories, and then I ended up at my debut. And it sounds like you've had maybe a fairly similar path, but you've had a whole other career too. Can you talk a little bit about?
So I did my undergraduate degree at James Madison University. I studied English and journalism. I had thoughts about becoming a journalist, a reporter, and then I realized that meant you actually had to cold call strangers, and I still cannot do that.
Yeah.
So I focused on English, and then I went to grad school. And then for a hot minute, I thought I'd be a professor. So but I left halfway through. I ended up with my master's, and then joined the workforce, and really kind of haphazardly fell into marketing and advertising copywriting. It seemed like a natural fit for someone like me who enjoys reading and writing. It was, it was and still is a great way to keep the lights on. I don't think anyone decides to write a book thinking I have to pay the electricity bill next week, so let me just write a novel or a short story. But through so much of that, I think I was so focused on my job, but I really just had this inherent passion for writing fiction. But it was really something that, to be quite honest, I kept closeted. I would never, identify myself as a writer back then. I mean, I clearly was a writer, just, both in my profession, but also, I think part of writing too is just a way of perceiving the world. And long story short, Rebecca, I had a very comfortable job, and I just thought, I'd finished paying off my student loans. And I said, well, I'm going to take a sabbatical, and I'm going to take 6 months, and I'm going to sit down and by this time I'd had the idea for a book percolating. So I was going to take 6 months off to write this book, but also really just to kind of devote myself to trying to write fiction. And so in a weird way, it was a very similar process to coming out of the closet, and that I would slowly start to tell people, like, yes, hi, I'm a writer, I'm working on a novel, and the more I said that, the less and less shame there would be in that. So those two journeys for me were surprisingly similar.
It makes sense.
Yeah, and then I honestly I just treated it like a full-time job. I mean, I spent 4 to 5 hours a day just writing, just not paying attention to how good it was. I mean, I think a big reason, and I suspect this is true of other writers, I think what kept me off from writing so long was because I operated under the assumption that if what I wrote was not perfect and ready to be printed, that it was not worthwhile. And honestly, that's something that I really needed to go through my career as a copywriter, and having all these strangers read things I wrote and mark it up. And it really kind of gave me the kind of necessary armor for criticism. Not only taking criticism, but I think also recognizing what in your own writing is worth fighting for, and is worth just saying, I appreciate your opinion, but this is not how I envision the piece. I feel like that's a very important lesson for writers that I learned very late, is that there's no law saying that you have to take every single person's piece of feedback. You get to pick and choose. I mean, if 3 or 4 people have the same comment or criticism, then it's likely that there's a problem.
Yeah.
But if one person says your character is unlikable, and 3 other people, I don't know.
Yeah. That's so fascinating, because I think unless people have been through a lot of writing workshops, like, they might replicate that experience, but having that professionally and understanding when you just can dismiss criticism, I think especially a lot of debut authors, they feel like that relationship with an editor or an agent is so tenuous that they have to agree to everything.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I also, again, had the dumb luck of just working with a wonderful editor who really kind of empowered me and said right from the beginning, look, like, this is your book. Like, there are certain things that I will tell you, like, absolutely have to be changed. But for the most part, if I'm telling you something, if I have a comment or a criticism, you have to trust your own instincts. And this is, you wrote this story, and this is this is the way you wrote it, and this is why we've invested so much time and money in trying to share it with the world. And so that was absolutely very empowering. I feel like there are a lot of horror stories out there between writers and editors, but I mean, mine was just great. And
If
to,
people
to the
don't
to the point
know,
where I was like, wait, like, shouldn't you be ripping this apart? Like, you know, shouldn't you be sending me a box of ashes and you burnt the latest manuscript and are telling me to
yeah,
write it all over again? But that's, you know, that's another hard lesson too, is kind of trusting yourself along the way, that what you are writing is good and is worthwhile. And you know, and you know, I struggle a lot with self-doubt, and I feel like a lot of writers do.
of course, yeah.
But really, yeah, just kind of trusting your own instincts. I mean, writing, so much of writing and editing and criticism and readership it's all just so subjective, that I've almost kind of realized that the only sense of objectivity that one can have is really one's own taste and instinct.
Yeah, yeah. I'm gonna put together a few questions here from the audience, and I'm
Yeah,
kind of
okay.
synthesizing two questions here. One is about Sebastian fixating on a number of art pieces throughout the book, especially from the National Gallery, which I went to college near DC, and so then like that was the gallery I went to for art classes. I love the
Yeah,
National Gallery.
yeah, yeah.
Um, Someone asking, is there, was there a certain painting or image that resonated with you while you were writing? But then Bill asking very specifically about Watson and the Shark, which was always my favorite painting at the National Gallery.
Oh, no kidding.
Yeah, loved
Okay.
it, totally obsessed with it. And I was, I could see like you have Sebastian finding that painting as a kid. I was like 20 when I saw it. I was not a kid obsessed with shark attacks, but I was staring at it for hours. Can you talk about that, about the National Gallery, about that painting, the way that weaves through the book a little?
Sure. Well, I mean, the National Gallery is right down the street from me. I try to spend as much time as I can there, and so it made sense for someone in with Sebastian's profession and his mindset to want to spend so much time there as well. In terms of the specific Copley painting, Watson and the Shark, I first encountered that painting as a boy. I mean, I loved sharks, and so we were not short of books in our house, so I would just have stacks and stacks of books about sharks. And so I distinctly recall seeing that painting in one of them, and it's interesting to think about my perceptions of the painting at that time, because I know there's a very handsome naked man in the water. But of course, I wasn't paying attention to that at the time. I was really just interested in the fact that there's this giant shark charging toward him. But then looking at it now, like as an adult and as a gay man and someone with what I hope are perhaps more mature sensibilities, there's something strangely erotic about that painting. And the kind of danger of desiring other men that I think is very important to Oscar and Sebastian's childhood. And then coupled with other forms of danger that kind of manifest themselves later in the book. So that particular painting, and it appears at multiple parts in the story, just kind of became just a through line, but also just kind of a home base. All four of the characters interact with that painting in some way, shape, or form, and
Yeah.
And part of it too, Rebecca, is just I love that painting, and I wanted to put it in there.
Yeah. So when I was talking to my novel student, I teach a novel writing class in Chicago, and I was talking to my students last week about motif.
Yeah.
And this idea that, when a motif, say, is musical in a movie, it's like, oh, there it goes, I see what it's doing. And it can be harder to pinpoint what's a motif, what's a recurring, if a character comes back, that's not a motif, that's a character. But when there's an object that recurs and takes on different meaning, or there's an image that recurs and takes on different meaning. So it's something that helping us build the echo chamber of the novel. It's helping us measure the character's change against it and what it means, I think, in a really...
I never thought of it that way before, but that's a really great way to describe it, is an echo chamber, because I mean, there are so many at least my intention was that there are so many echoes in both kind of Oscar's journey and in Sebastian's journey. And like I said earlier, kind of discovering those along the way was part of the enjoyment that I got. I mean, some of them are deliberately orchestrated, and then some of them were just serendipitous. And I would read the page proofs and be like, wait, wow, like really? I mean, that's the kind of fascinating and kind of mysterious subconscious part of writing is I didn't deliberately insert, echo X, Y, or Z, but something inside my brain was
Right.
just like, this is what you need to do. I mean, I
It's the subconscious, right? Like we dream in imagery, we dream in symbols, we have recurring dreams. That's
yeah,
our brain telling us stories and finding meaning through those patterns, right?
yes, but I also don't want to imply that. I mean, I believe so much of writing is really just forcing yourself to sit down and actually do the work. So I don't want to suggest that it's all just this kind of magical,
No.
way to happen. I mean,
Yes.
there were, believe me, there were plenty of painful moments at this desk where I am speaking with you right now.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. To say that the subconscious comes into it does not mean that we're looking into a crystal ball and kind of feeling the vibe, but in the middle of the blood, sweat, and tears, the subconscious comes in.
something happens.
Yeah. Yeah.
Something unexplainable. Yeah.
Yeah. So Jake is asking a question that I had too, which is that you really do a great job of differing Oscar and Sebastian's sections stylistically.
Mhm.
And Jake is pointing out that for instance, Sebastian's sections lacked quotation marks.
Yeah. Yeah.
What's interesting to me is because I was going back and forth between audio and the page, I didn't know that at first. What I picked up on early was Sebastian's sections are past tense and Oscar's are present tense.
Yeah.
And then as I was taking a break from audio and looking, I was like, oh, wait, it looks different on the page too.
Yeah.
Can you talk about that, the decisions that went into that, the effect you hope that has?
Sure. Yeah, sure, Jake. So my intention with that was I wanted these men to be so different that even the ways in which their story, just even the way in which I think very visually too, so even the way in which the text appeared on the page in each of their sections had to look very different to me, and kind of had to be in a strange way an extension of their personalities, right? So for Oscar, it's very kind of surface level. It's very spiky, is a word that I heard
Yeah.
someone else use about it that I am officially co-opting,
Love
and
it.
saying is my own. But then for the Sebastian sections, I mean, what we're dealing with is a man who is so trapped in his own head that I really wanted the look of the text to kind of feel just like these blocks. Like I wanted a kind of visual cue of the burden of kind of what it's like to constantly be living in the past, and to constantly be living in your head, and by kind of, without giving it away, by kind of setting that up, making some of the things that he does toward the back half of the book perhaps a little bit more believable, because you're already imagining just how claustrophobic it is to be in his head. There's that. And then I also just have a kink for writing like that, like Maggie Nelson, Jenny Erpenbeck, a lot of these, Thomas Bernhard I've started reading, just a lot of these European writers who, just have no shame about presenting the reader with a giant just block of text. I mean, so I feel like in writing this, I had very artistic reasons, and then I also just had very just kind of selfish reasons, which I mean, you
Yeah.
can vouch for that, right, Rebecca? We all do that.
Oh, for sure. I mean, you fundamentally, you're going to have to, it takes 3 or 4 years usually to write a novel. And then you have the time that you're living with it out on the road or, in events. You have to amuse yourself and writing in a way that are aesthetically cool with.
Yeah,
And
it's okay for writing to be fun sometimes.
yeah, exactly. So I'm going to synthesize a couple more questions here. So the first part is Barry asking if you feel like you and your book are part of a new renaissance in gay fiction. saying it seemed to be a dead zone for a while, but there are so many books coming out in the past couple of years that he can barely keep up, which is I
Yeah.
think, a lovely thing.
No, yeah, you and me
And
both. Yeah.
to add on to that, Shane, who, by the way, is a wonderful bookseller in St. Louis, who's here in the audience. So
Okay.
if you ever get to go down to St. Louis to Left Bank Books, it's a wonderful store.
Okay.
Shane is asking, what's the difference between pushing the boundaries for a queer audience and pushing the boundaries for a straight audience in a queer book? I feel like those go together, not to give
Wow.
you too much to answer at once, but
Yeah. Well, I will kind of, the first question I feel like is relatively easy for me to answer because, you know, I'm the writer, so I'm not in the position to talk about whether or not I belong to, or I'm somehow, you know, kind of a forwarding a kind of, you know, vanguard of gay or queer literature, other than to say, like, I absolutely sympathize with the struggle to just keep up with so many of these books, because there are just so many. I mean, I still haven't read The Prophets. I still haven't read Detransition Baby. I mean, I've just got, and those are just two of many. And then there are more coming out. And I think that this is, I don't know, it seems to me to be just a great time to be a queer writer, and also just a reader, whether queer or not, who enjoys queer fiction. I mean, there's so many stories to tell, and I feel like the more stories we can tell, I think the more we can kind of get away, you know, again, to what I was talking about earlier, about feeling such an obligation of presenting picture perfect queer people, right? Because there will be those stories, and those stories are very important for the people who need them. But for the people who don't, you know, we can also see, you know, gay villains. Like, I mean, you know, we're just as capable of blowing up the world as anyone else.
yeah. Yeah.
And then, I'm sorry, so the second question
Well, the question
was,
was about pushing boundaries, you know, what it might mean to push boundaries for a queer audience, reading a book like this versus what it means to push boundaries for a straight audience in a queer book. And maybe just by extension, you know, do you think about audience as you write a book like this? Are you thinking about, you know, straight readers in addition to queer readers? Are you considering that?
you know, at the risk of sounding disingenuous, I personally don't think of readers in terms of demographics the way that perhaps a publisher or you know, a marketing team would, you know, understandably. um i i i, I yeah, no, I never operated under that, you know, thinking, oh, like, I have to make this book both accessible to heteronormative people, and then also, you know, very entertaining for gay men, and for queer people in general. I tried to write people as human as possible, and honestly, just, if there's anything I've learned, so much of it is just being true to the story that you want to tell, and just hoping that people um, identify with it, and embrace it. I did know that um, I didn't undertake this book in any way to kind of educate people on what gay culture is like, or the various ways in which gay men think about their world. Like, if you're interested in that, you can pursue that on your own. I feel like hopefully there are enough context clues in the novel that you can make sense of it, and that doesn't feel like it's specialized in any way. um but I think part of that, in terms of trying to make it accessible to both queer people and non-queer people, is, look, like, this novel is very unapologetically gay, but to me, the thing that's most interesting to me is something that's even more universal, which is really at the heart of it. This novel is just about how two people cope with the passing of time, and that's
Yeah.
something that I don't think is bound by a particular race or ethnicity, or you know, sexual identity, or any kind of worldview. It's just an aspect of being a conscious human being.
That might also answer this other question from William, but I'd love to hear, if you want to add anything to it. Saying, is this novel a call for the gay community to accept each other's views on being mainstream versus being queerly rebellious, so that our community doesn't fall into the trappings of the larger society as a whole? So I think William seems to be asking something similar in terms of, do you feel like you had a thesis going into this book? Do you feel like you had, a statement that you were making, or were you more asking questions around those things?
Yeah, William. I mean, well, I certainly was asking questions. I mean, I think if I had a solid thesis, I wouldn't have racked my brains writing a novel. I would have,
Right.
a
Just a
personal
tweet.
essay or an op-ed. But to answer your question, William, I mean, I guess, look, my own personal opinion is I could give a shit like what people choose to do with their personal lives. I think we could all stand to maybe be a little bit more apathetic about how people live their lives. Of course, there's when you have characters who embody that, there's no drama there. There's no story in that. Um, but look, I mean, like, we are a community of human beings, and so it sounds trite, but the way I feel now at this moment in my life, community is so important to me. I've gone a year without seeing so many of my friends. Just even just being around random strangers, just that kind of energy. And I have to think that, look, like, regardless of what your views are on gay marriage or heteronormativity or X, Y, and Z, look, I mean, like, we're all in this together, and no one is getting out on their own. So my answer at 8:54 Eastern Standard Time is we all just, we're all in this together. I
Yeah.
guess. And I feel like there's been a lot of kind of, think pieces and pushback against that idea of, we're all in this together in terms of, describing the pandemic. But I feel like when you're talking about what it means to belong to a community, I mean, I believe there has to be a way to navigate differences and still recognize the commonalities that we all share.
Yeah. That actually leads in really well to this question. There it is, from Braden. Part of this question is for me, so I can answer that really quickly first. But it says, can you talk a bit about the concept that comes up a few times in the book about who belongs in what spaces? Oscar doesn't belong at the bathhouse, according to his friends, and Oscar doesn't believe that women belong in gay bars. Braden's interested in hearing my reaction to this, being a woman in queer spaces. I'll say really quickly, you actually will very rarely find me in a gay bar. Unabridged is one thing, but unless friends drag me, and usually we're all drunk, and I'm kind of dragged into space, for that reason, I just feel like this isn't, I have infinite spaces, and I'm, if it's genuinely the vibe, it's tea dance in Provincetown and literally the whole town is going, I'll be there. But, just going in with girlfriends to a gay bar, that's not my thing. But I'm curious to hear Zach's response, especially since this comes up a lot in the book.
Yeah, no, that's a great question, Braden. And I never thank you for making that connection between Oscar's friends judging him for not belonging in this bathhouse. I didn't think of it that way. So that adds a very interesting layer to it. That was a topic that I wanted to be very sensitive about, and that when I wrote it, especially this very kind of awkward, dangerous interaction that a drunken Oscar has with a girl at a gay beach bar in Delaware. But I still wanted to illustrate, like, conversations that I've had with people, or think pieces that I've read about, who belongs in what spaces, and at what point does this kind of pursuit of who belongs in what spaces and where too. I mean, there's there's a huge difference between a gay bar here in Washington, D.C. or New York City and one in some small town in the Midwest. I mean,
Oh yeah.
they're both serving very different you know, communal purposes. I mean, in some regards, you could argue that a gay bar here in DC is just another bar, again, because we're everywhere. But the issue of women in bars is I think kind of complicated. I think before marriage equality, it was absolutely an insult for someone to have
A
a
bachelorette.
bachelorette party.
Yeah.
And there's still just some kind of strange objectification that still exists. But I think it was especially toxic back then when you were having these celebratory moments in these spaces where 90% of the people there could not have that kind of party legally recognized if they wanted to. Not the party, but the event that the party is for. But then, like, what do we mean when and so part of that whole idea of women in bars and is that good and is that bad and what does that mean? I mean, to me, that was just a kind of smaller skirmish in this larger kind of struggle about, well, what do we mean when we talk about the death of gay culture, right? I remember hearing this phrase in even back in like 2006, and I came out in grad school in 2005. So I came out and I'm ready to like engage with the community, and I'm reading about the death of gay culture, and that's like, what the hell? I just got here. Like it's dying. And what I believe and what I try to articulate in this novel is we're not talking about a culture dying so much as changing, all right? And this is the nature of progress. Like things change, and then you gain some things, and some things are left behind, right? So for example, the apps, right? You gain Grinder and such. You gain so much connectivity, right? Especially in places where gay men might not have public spaces in which to connect with one another. But what are we losing? Well, I would argue that it's become a lot easier to just kind of treat people as, disposable. And even when that's not, the kind of kink that they're looking for, right? And this is true of it's true of the telephone, it's true of the television. Like, for every kind of progress, something is lost or changes. And I guess it just depends on what the individual person thinks is worth fighting for.
Yeah. We have a question here from Aaron, which is that you've mentioned in other talks, this is someone who's followed your other talks, this is awesome, that many people in your book are Frankenstein characters. For example, you are like Sebastian, but you're not the same as Sebastian. And Aaron is wondering if you can talk a little more about your formation of ancillary characters, such as Danny and others, in this kind of Frankenstein way. So I guess, do they come from you? Are they part of you? Are they, are you getting things from out in the world, from other people? How are you doing?
Yeah, so my Frankenstein response was to a question that someone asked me in an earlier, in a previous event of is the writer Sean, is he Edmund White, or is he X, Y, or Z?
Yeah.
And so I use that term Frankenstein in that, the way that I build my characters, and there is obviously a different kind of amount of work and effort that goes into kind of crafting your central characters as opposed to kind of ancillary characters. I mean, they are important, and it's incumbent upon the writer to make them human and real, regardless of whether they're in the book for all 288 pages or just for 5. But my Frankenstein term is just to mean that I build these people in my mind based on the hair of someone I see passing in the street, or the tone of voice that a friend of mine uses when she's upset, or the body type of my partner or my sister, and just kind of this accumulation of basically, different kind of body parts when you think about it, and it sounds very morbid, and using it to kind of build composite characters that way, and then kind of borrowing where and when you need them.
Mm-hmm. And of course, they're all in the same way, that a psychiatrist would say everyone in your dreams is you, even as it's someone else. They're all at least coming from us as writers, right?
Yes.
We're fleshing them out, we're giving them.
Yes, but I will say, in my defense, for anyone who might have a perhaps very valid critique of my ancillary characters, I mean, I knew from the beginning that, look, like, this is the Sebastian and Oscar show, and even with their supporting characters, with Arthur the student and with Sean the author, excuse me, everything that we knew about them had to be perceived through the lens of Oscar and Sebastian. I had flirted early on with expanding this even greater and giving all four of the characters a voice. And to me, the novel just became very unwieldy. I had always envisioned this novel as being relatively modest in size. But part of the point is about kind of putting the reader in this position of really having to navigate a world from the perspective of these 30-something gay men. And so basically how they perceive and objectify the generations before and after them, it all has to be filtered in through their own biased perspectives.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Would you be up for a lightning round? Can I ask you?
What does that mean?
I'm going to ask you things like, would you rather visit France or Australia? And you just answer them real fast.
Shit, yeah, okay.
It's a fun way to end. So as we wrap up. Okay, cool. We'll do a few of these and then, but stick around.
Do you answer them as well, or?
What's that?
You answer them as well, or this is all about me?
No, it's you. I mean, I could, but yeah.
Okay, all right, go.
Okay. Okay, would you rather visit France or Australia? I'm actually going to ask you that question.
Oh, France.
Okay, why?
It's cliche, but I love cafe culture.
Yeah.
And I love bread and cheese and wine and history and art and yeah, it's cliche, but I own it. I love it.
I mean, there's a reason everyone loves it.
Yeah.
Okay, no wrong.
And I hate flying too. So I feel like a trip
sure.
to Australia would be.
That is a long flight.
Yeah.
No wrong answer. We won't be mad at you, but National Gallery or Art Institute of Chicago?
Oh, come on. I have to say the National Gallery. All due respect. Okay. All due respect to everyone at Chicago, but yeah.
Okay. National Gallery or National Portrait Gallery?
National Gallery.
Yeah?
Yeah. Do you prefer one or the other?
No, I like the National Portrait Gallery in England a lot.
Okay.
National Portrait Gallery.
Is that what you were referring to?
Or no, I meant DC.
Oh, yeah. No, I prefer the National Gallery, although I will say the Portrait Museum and the American Art Museum, which are both in the same building, it's a fantastic building. Yeah. So as a space, it's great. But yeah, I still have to say National Gallery of Art.
Yeah. Would you rather have breakfast for dinner or dessert for dinner?
Oh my God. Breakfast.
Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like 10-year-old me would have said dessert in a heartbeat. But I feel like the older I get, my palate changes, and I notice when things are just too terribly sweet now. It's kind of sad, actually.
It's sophistication, but
it's another reminder of age that I'm noticing that things taste too sweet, and when I go to the movies now, they're too loud, and I can't understand what they're saying.
Right. Okay. When this is all over, when quarantine is over, would you rather go out to dinner at a fabulous restaurant with a bunch of friends, or have a huge party at your own house with a lot of friends?
I would rather have a huge party at my own house with a lot of friends. I mean, we usually do have a pretty lovely Halloween party. I mean, my partner is enamored with Halloween in a way that still kind of boggles my mind. So we always have a ton of people over in our tiny row home, and it spills out into the backyard, and it's great. And we certainly, we weren't able to do it last year. I'm thinking, maybe fingers crossed, we might be able to do it this year. But yeah, if it was a party in my own house, yeah, that would be I would say the more the merrier. Yeah.
Okay, last one. Hottest day of summer or coldest day of winter? You had to have one tomorrow, one or the other.
shouldn't admit this to strangers, but I would say coldest day in winter because I have very strange sweat glands. So I feel like during the hottest day in summer, I would be miserable. But then I'm also sweating in winter. So
Yeah. So you should move to Chicago. You can handle it. This is good.
well, that's certainly one thing I've thought about it.
Yeah.
I feel like that turns away a lot of people, but for me, I think that would be one of its charms. Yeah.
There's no such thing as bad weather. There's just the wrong clothes. You invest in some core pieces. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, so as we wrap up, first of all, there's a link in the chat to buy this book if you have not bought it yet. That would be a great thing to do. If you want to listen to it on audio, which I highly recommend, make sure you have the Libro FM app, libro.fm, because then you can purchase it from Unabridged Books rather than sending Jeff Bezos your money, because he doesn't need your money. And Libro is a better app than Audible, actually. It's fantastic. You can choose any indie bookstore. Thanks, Matt. It's in the chat. You can choose any indie bookstore with every purchase. You can change it or keep it all on one. It's the exact same audiobook, better app. Money goes to a better place. But it's out. So we're in hardcover right now. I assume paperback next year.
Yes, I believe in February. And so I'll also piggyback on that and saying, who likes to just buy one book? So I would recommend that people buy yours as well, even if they've read it before. I'm sure most people here have, but buy a copy to gift to someone, because it's a lovely book. I admittedly put off reading it until I was well along in my story, because I didn't want to be intimidated by how good it was. And of course, I was right in my decision, because it's just a lovely book, Rebecca, and thank you for writing it, and just thank you for taking time to talk with me.
Of course, this was a blast. Thank you, everyone, for coming. Thank you, Unabridged Books and Matt, for putting this together and hosting and staying late in the store, which maybe is still open, I don't know. And thank you, everyone. See, it's still, I don't know, is it still open, Matt, or are you?
No, we are closed now. I'm still operating at limited capacity these days, but it was worth sticking around to listen to you guys. So thank you both so much for joining us. Rebecca, thank you for your thoughtful questions, for facilitating this conversation. Zach, thank you for joining us and for writing such a wonderful book. And everybody else, thank you for joining us. Like Rebecca said, we've got links in the chat if you want to pick up the book. You can also get Rebecca's book here. We've got signed copies still available right now. So check us out, and thank you for coming.
Thank you very much, everyone.
Good night.
Good night.